Picture this scenario. You're lying awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, and your mind is racing through every possible disaster that could strike tomorrow. Your car could break down before Fajr, your laptop might die the night before that big work presentation, you could lose your job to a layoff, your Zakat anniversary is coming up, and you're not even sure if you actually have the money to discharge it cleanly. Maybe your mom calls and says she needs help with a medical bill back home. Sound familiar? Well, what if I told you there's a specific dollar amount that could eliminate almost all of those midnight anxiety sessions and fundamentally transform how you navigate life as a Muslim? Most people in our community think financial milestones are just numbers that wealthy uncles made up to make the rest of us feel inadequate. But here's something that might surprise you. There's actual psychology and mathematics behind why certain amounts of money create dramatic shifts in your day-to-day existence inside the halal frame. And the first real game changer isn't $1 million or even $100,000. It's $10,000. My name is Omar, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, halal finance, and why some people in our community seem to glide through financial challenges while others are constantly stressed about their bank account, their zakat math, and whether the credit card they're holding is quietly compromising their deen. If you've ever wondered what it actually feels like to have different amounts of money saved up and how each milestone changes your decision making as a practicing Muslim, make sure to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps clarify things for you. Now, before we dive into what makes $10,000 so special, let me paint you a picture of what life looks like without it. You know that feeling when you're at the grocery store standing in front of the meat counter and you're mentally calculating whether you can afford the Zabiha certified chicken or whether you have to drive 20 minutes further to the cheaper halal butcher because the difference is going to mess up your week, or when your friends suggest dinner at that new spot and you have to come up with a creative excuse because you can't admit that $30 for a halal friendly meal would blow your entire budget. This is the reality for millions of practicing Muslims who are living paycheck to paycheck. Every financial decision becomes a careful calculation. And on top of that, you're stacking a halal versus haram filter on every receipt. Every unexpected expense feels like a potential catastrophe. You're constantly playing defense with your money instead of being able to make proactive choices about your future. But here's where things get interesting. There's a specific psychological phenomenon that happens when you accumulate your first $10,000 in halal savings, and it has nothing to do with being able to buy expensive things. In fact, most people who reach this milestone don't dramatically change their spending habits at all. The real transformation is much more subtle and much more powerful. The first thing that changes is your relationship with risk. When you have zero savings, every decision feels dangerous. Taking a new job, moving cities to be near a stronger masjid, even planning umrah for the family. These become massive sources of stress because one wrong move could leave you financially devastated. But when you have $10,000 sitting in a halal savings vehicle, suddenly those same decisions feel manageable. You're not necessarily going to quit your job tomorrow and become a full-time Quran teacher, but you might finally have the confidence to ask for that promotion or to move your family to a city where there's an actual Islamic school instead of a Sunday-only program. You might be willing to invest in yourself by taking a course or certification that could boost your earning potential. The safety net doesn't make you reckless, it gives you permission to think beyond just surviving until the next paycheck. There's also something fascinating that happens to your brain chemistry when you see a 5-figure balance for the first time. Neuroscientists have found that financial security reduces cortisol levels, your body's primary stress hormone. So reaching $10,000 doesn't just change your finances, it literally changes how your body responds to daily challenges. And that physical calm shows up in how you pray, how you parent, and how you interact with the people in your life. Think about the last time you had a minor car problem. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, that check engine light might as well be a countdown timer to financial disaster. You're stressed about repairs, whether you'll have to use a credit card you know is built on riba, or whether you'll have to ask family for a loan. But when you have $10,000 saved, that same check engine light becomes a simple inconvenience. You're annoyed, sure, but you're not panicked. This shift from panic to mild annoyance might seem small, but it has ripple effects through your entire life. When you're not constantly worried about money, you make better decisions in general. You sleep better. You're more khushu in salah. You're more patient with your spouse and your kids. Financial stress affects every aspect of human behavior, and removing it unlocks mental energy you can redirect toward actually improving your situation. But here's something most people don't realize about the $10,000 milestone. The majority of the benefit doesn't come from spending the money. It comes from knowing the money is there. This is what financial planners call the emergency fund effect. And in our community, it's even more important because most of you don't want to lean on credit cards when life punches. An emergency fund isn't really about emergencies, it's about the peace of mind that comes from knowing you can handle them without compromising on riba. Most people who build $10,000 in halal savings never actually spend it on emergencies. Instead, they spend it on opportunities. They invest in education, they take a side income course, they move to a better location, or they simply have the mental bandwidth to focus on increasing their income because they're not constantly worried about basic survival. There's also a confidence factor that's hard to quantify but impossible to ignore. When you know you have money in the bank, you carry yourself differently. You negotiate better. You're more willing to walk away from a bad deal because you're not desperate. That confidence often leads to better job opportunities, better business partnerships, and frankly, better marriage proposals or proposals for your kids, because the auntie and uncle network can smell desperation from across the masjid. Now, you might be thinking that $10,000 sounds like an impossible amount to save, especially if you're currently struggling to put away $100 a month after rent, halal groceries, and Sunday school fees. But here's what's interesting about human psychology. The hardest part isn't saving the money itself. The hardest part is developing the identity of someone who saves money. Most people approach saving like it's a temporary diet. They cut expenses dramatically for a few months, save aggressively, and then burn out and go right back to their old habits. The people who successfully reach $10,000 don't think of saving as a temporary sacrifice. They think of it as becoming a different type of Muslim. This identity shift is crucial because it affects every financial decision you make. When you see yourself as someone who saves money intentionally, you start noticing opportunities to reduce expenses you never saw before. You become more creative about additional income. You start thinking long-term instead of just chasing immediate gratification. The beautiful thing is that it gets easier as you go. Saving your first $1,000 is brutal. It requires real lifestyle changes and constant willpower. Saving your second $1,000 is noticeably easier because you've already developed the habits and the niyyah. By your fifth or sixth $1,000, the process feels almost automatic. There's also a mathematical reality that makes $10,000 particularly powerful in our context. This amount can cover the vast majority of unexpected expenses that derail people financially. Car repairs, medical bills, job loss, a surprise trip back home for a janazah. Most of these can be handled with less than $10,000. Once you reach this milestone, you're effectively immune to most of the financial disasters that keep people stuck in the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle. And here's the part that's unique to us. According to the most recent Federal Reserve survey of household economics and decision-making, about 47% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency from cash savings, and the median emergency savings amount sits around $600 per Empower's tracking data. Cross that with the ISPU American Muslim Poll 2025, finding that 37% of US Muslim households earn under $30,000 a year compared to 26% of the general public. And you start to see why our community is especially vulnerable to riba-based credit when emergencies hit. $10,000 in actual cash savings doesn't just protect you, it removes the temptation to reach for the haram option in a moment of pressure. But perhaps the most significant change that happens when you save your first $10,000 is how you start thinking about money itself. Instead of viewing money as something that disappears from your paycheck every month, you start seeing it as a tool that multiplies your options inside what's permissible. Before you have savings, money feels scarce and finite. Every dollar spent is a dollar gone forever. But when you have $10,000 working as your foundation, you begin to understand that money can actually create more money in halal ways. This is where people get interested in concepts like Sharia screened equities, sukuk, halal real estate syndications, and side income built on actual production rather than interest. Not because they suddenly became finance experts, but because they finally have the mental space to think beyond covering the basics. When you're not worried about rent, you can start wondering whether your employer's 401k plan offers a self-directed brokerage account, a kind of option Joe Bradford and the Zoya team have been advocating for as a religious accommodation for years. When you're not stressed about grocery bills, you can start researching screened ETFs on platforms like Wahed Invest, where the US minimum is just $100 and the wrap fee is 0.99% under $250,000. Here's something that might blow your mind. The Muslim with $10,000 in halal savings is actually closer to financial independence than the Muslim with zero savings, even if the second person earns almost twice as much. Why? Because the saver has developed the most important skill in wealth building, which isn't earning money, it's keeping money inside permissible bounds. You probably know brothers who pull six figures but somehow are always broke. They drive luxury SUVs, they live in fancy apartments, they eat at the new halal steakhouse twice a week. They have no savings, no halal investment account, and a credit card balance quietly accruing riba. Meanwhile, you might know a family making $50,000 a year that has built substantial savings, paid zakat on time every Ramadan, and started a small wahed account. The difference isn't income, it's mindset. And reaching $10,000 in savings is like a master class in developing the right financial mindset. You learn to distinguish between wants and needs. You become skilled at finding ways to reduce expenses without feeling deprived. Most importantly, you develop the patience to delay gratification, which is probably the single most valuable financial and spiritual skill anyone can learn. Now let's talk about what $10,000 can actually do for you in practical terms. First, it covers almost any car repair short of a new engine. Most automotive emergencies cost between $500 and $3,000. With $10,000 in the bank, car problems shift from financial disasters to minor inconveniences. Medical emergencies become manageable too. Even without great insurance, most urgent care visits, ER trips, or minor procedures fall in this range. You're not going to cover major surgery with $10,000, but you can handle the vast majority of health issues that pop up without reaching for an interest-bearing card. Job loss becomes survivable. $10,000 gives you roughly 3 to 6 months of breathing room to find new employment, which for a Muslim is often longer because you may be screening employers for prayer rooms, Friday flexibility, and culture. That extra time means you can hold out for the role that respects your deen instead of accepting the first offer that comes along. But here's where it gets really interesting. Having $10,000 doesn't just protect you from disasters, it creates opportunities that wouldn't exist otherwise. Maybe you hear about a certification that could boost your salary by $10,000 a year, but it costs $2,000 up front. Without savings, this is impossible. With your foundation, it's an obvious investment. Or perhaps a brother at the masjid mentions he's starting a halal meal prep business and looking for a small equity partner. Without savings, you can only make dua. With $10,000, you have the option to participate in something that could change your trajectory. I'm not saying you should dump your entire emergency fund into your cousin's crypto scheme that he insists is halal because it's not interest-bearing. Having options feels incredibly different from having no options at all. The psychological impact extends beyond financial decisions. When you have money saved, you sleep better. Studies show that people with emergency funds report significantly better sleep than those without. Financial stress is a leading cause of insomnia, and removing it has immediate health benefits. Your relationships improve as well. Money stress is one of the primary causes of marital conflict, and in our community, that pressure is amplified by mahar expectations, walima costs, and family obligations on both sides. When you're not constantly worried about bills, you have more emotional energy for the people you care about. You're less irritable, less anxious, and more present. There's also the confidence boost that comes with money in the bank. You walk into a job interview differently when you don't desperately need the position. You're more likely to negotiate salary, vacation, and explicit prayer accommodations because you're not operating from fear. That confidence often results in better offers and higher compensation, which creates a positive feedback loop that accelerates your progress. But let's address the elephant. $10,000 might sound enormous if you're currently living paycheck to paycheck. Good news, you don't need to save it all at once. Trying to save too aggressively often backfires because it isn't sustainable. The most successful savers I know started with ridiculously small amounts, $50 a month, sometimes $25. The key is consistency, not the size of the contribution. Once you build the habit, you can gradually increase the amount as your income grows or as you find ways to trim expenses. Here's a reality check that might motivate you. The average American spends over $3,000 a year on coffee, dining out, and convenience purchases. In our community, add walima gifts, aid clothes, and the spontaneous biryani delivery on a Friday night. If you redirected just 1/3 of that toward halal savings, you'd hit $10,000 in less than 3 years. I'm not saying never enjoy a meal out or skip the ed clothes for the kids. I am saying most people have more flexibility than they realize. The difference between someone who builds savings and someone who doesn't usually comes down to awareness and intentionality, not income. The compound effect of having $10,000 goes far beyond the immediate security. It changes how you think about risk, how you approach opportunities, and how you plan for the future. It also lifts you cleanly above the silver-based nisab threshold, which in 2026 sits around $1,400 $495 according to SAPA USA and the American Muslim Community Foundation. Once you hold $10,000 in surplus wealth above your debts for one full lunar year, you owe 2.5% in Zakat. That's a real obligation, not a vibe, and the practice of computing it forces you to track your wealth accurately, which is itself a wealth-building skill most people never develop. Let's talk about decision fatigue, which sounds like corporate buzzword nonsense, but is a real psychological phenomenon. Every day you make thousands of tiny financial decisions: generic pasta or name brand, pack lunch or grab the halal cart, premium gas or regular. As a Muslim, layer on top of that: is this brand actually halal certified or just labeled vegetarian? Is this restaurant's chicken zabiha or industry standard? Each micro decision burns mental energy. By the end of the day, you're exhausted from constantly calculating whether you can afford things and whether they meet your standards. Here's what happens when you have $10,000 in the bank. Suddenly 90% of those daily money decisions become irrelevant. You're not choosing the cheapest pasta because you're worried about your account. You're choosing based on what you actually prefer, and you have the bandwidth to also keep the halal filter on without it feeling impossible. I know a brother who told me that the first time he walked into a grocery store after hitting $10,000 in savings, he almost cried. Not because he went crazy and bought saffron and wagyu, because he realized he could focus on what he actually wanted to eat instead of what he could afford to eat, while still keeping it strictly halal. That's a level of freedom most people don't even realize they're missing until they experience it. Now let's get real about something financial advisors don't always emphasize. Having $10,000 saved doesn't make you rich. It doesn't mean you can quit your job and become a full-time Islamic studies student. You're still going to think twice before buying a $1,000 gadget you don't need. But what it gives you is breathing room, and breathing room is the foundation of every good financial decision. When you're not gasping for air, you can think strategically about your money instead of just reacting to whatever crisis pops up. Maybe you notice your car insurance renewal is coming and you actually have time to shop around for a better rate. Maybe you realize your phone plan is ridiculous and you can switch without worrying about the early termination fee. Maybe you finally read the fine print on that 401k and discover it's defaulting your contributions into a target date fund stuffed with conventional bank stocks and interest-bearing bonds, and you have the will to call HR and ask whether they can add a self-directed brokerage account option. These optimizations might only save you $50 or $100 a month, but when you're not stressed, you're more likely to notice them, and they compound over time into serious savings that make your next goal more achievable. Here's something interesting about psychology that most people don't realize. When you have zero savings, every dollar feels precious because losing it means you're one step closer to disaster. But when you have $10,000 saved, individual dollars start feeling less precious, which actually makes you more willing to spend money on things that increase your earning potential. This sounds counterintuitive. It's incredibly important. The Muslim with no savings might skip a $50 ticket to a Muslim professional networking event because $50 feels like a lot. The Muslim with $10,000 saved attends and ends up meeting someone who offers him a job paying $5,000 more a year, or a co-investor for the halal business idea he's been sitting on for a year. The safety net doesn't make you careless, it makes you more willing to invest in opportunities that move you forward. Let's talk about something nobody mentions in personal finance content, but everyone in our community experiences in real life: the social dynamics of money. When you're constantly stressed about your finances, it affects how you interact with people in subtle but significant ways. You might avoid the Eid potluck because you can't afford to bring something. You might feel embarrassed about your situation and become withdrawn from the masjid community. You might develop quiet resentment toward friends who seem more financially stable, even though you know envy is something our deen warns about explicitly. So there you have it. $10,000 isn't just a number in your bank account. It's a complete psychological transformation that touches every aspect of your life as a Muslim, from sleeping better at night to walking into job interviews with confidence instead of desperation, from clearing the silver-nisab line cleanly to having the bandwidth to actually screen your investments. This milestone creates a domino effect most people never see coming. If you're currently staring at a bank balance that looks more like a phone number from the 1950s, don't panic. Start small, stay consistent. As always, the math is the math, the scholarly views are the scholarly views, and your final ruling on any specific product or contract has to come from a scholar you trust who knows your situation. The person you become while saving your first halal $10,000 is infinitely more valuable than the money itself.